Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to introduce today's guest, Dr. Michelle Drapkin. Michelle has been working in the area of behavior change for over 20 years. She is the owner and director of the CBT Center and previously held roles as a senior behavioral scientist at BetterUp, where she worked to advance the science and practice of evidence-based coaching in the workplace, and at Johnson & Johnson, where she led the development and deployment of behavior change interventions, including an intervention for well-being and mindfulness. She held a national position at the Department of Veterans Affairs and was on the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. She has dedicated her professional career to using psychological research to help people. She is a board-certified clinical psychologist and sees patients in her private practice, consults with healthcare tech startups, and delivers trainings and workshops on communication, motivation, and health and well-being at work and in life. She is the sole author of The Motivational Interviewing Path to Personal Change, the essential workbook for creating the life you want, from New Harbinger Publications. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michelle Drapkin. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, genuinely.
I am so happy to have you here too. And thank you for joining us in your home office in Metuchen, New Jersey. So, Michelle, as you know, on Work from the Inside Out, we love to begin at the beginning, and we like to learn a little bit about your formative years so that we can understand a little bit of that part of your life and find out if that part of your life informed or didn't inform where you are today. So take it away.
I love this question because there's so many people out there who look at someone who's had success and think it's just this clear, linear, straight trajectory, and don't realize all of the twists and turns and often where folks come from. So I'm going to share with you one of my dirty little secrets.
Okay.
So buckle up, pull the popcorn out. It's not that juicy, but I guess it kind of is. I'm a first generation college student, which means my parents did not go to college. My dad worked in retail, and my mom was a bank teller most of her life. And she was not well when I was in high school. And so a few different bouts of cancer. She's still alive and doing well today. But because of that, so talk about formative years, that's really high school and adolescence is a time where you're really growing and shaping. And I didn't necessarily get the support I needed because my parents were so focused on my mom's health. And I wound up, I did not graduate from high school.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent me to summer school because I had cut out of so many days that I did not have the attendance necessary to graduate. So I literally did not walk with my class and had to show up and go to summer school. Now, I was a pretty smart kid, so I was in AP classes. And I had the grades. And the funniest part of it is I was in Calc BC, which is essentially like Calc 2. And the summer school teachers are like, we don't have summer school work for people like you. And so they had me, and they were laughing just like we are. They're like, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, I didn't, this is, and my parents tried to fight it or whatever. But anyway, I wound up going to summer school for what amounted to essentially, I want to say it was like a day and a half because the summer school teachers were like, get out of here. Like, you don't belong here. And I was doing like pre-algebra. Like, it was really kind of funny. But you know what? I was lucky that I was really smart, and I guess I still am. I should probably give myself credit. And I was able to stay above the fray, and I graduated with a decent GPA and decent SATs. And I got into a really great small liberal arts college, and I really credit that next step in my journey for a lot of my success, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can imagine, being a kid who had been in all those advanced classes and not walking with your class, and, having to kind of just, especially at that tender an age, having to navigate, even, I mean, we're chuckling about the summer school teachers, kind of scratching their heads, but I can imagine it must have been somewhat daunting on top of your mom's illness and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was, listen, I think it was handled poorly. And I always go back to those days and I'm like, why didn't someone pull me aside and was like, how are you doing? Like, are you okay? What's going on with you? Instead, they punished me. It was very much more punitive than it was supportive. And so I'm really passionate, actually. So it does impact a lot of the work I do. I'm very passionate. I sit on the student advisory board for our town. I spend a lot of pro bono hours consulting with families about what they need to do, what's going on. We run a mindful parenting group on Facebook that's free. It's just a community. And so I really care about supporting parents and kids, especially during adolescence, which, middle school, high school, into college for sure.
Wow. So you did end up going to college on schedule, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I kicked some serious butt at college.
Tell us about that.
So I went to, I credit a lot of my success to talk about formative academic years. I went to Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a very small liberal arts college. I came from not a lot financially, and so got lots of grants and lots of financial support there. And I got lots of emotional, academic, mentoring support. I am still, I'm pretty old over here, oldish. I've been graduate almost 25 years, almost. I'm still in touch with my undergraduate mentor, who's out in California. I just saw him last year. Was out there, and when I say I kicked butt, I'm not joking. I had 4.0s almost every semester, and Franklin and Marshall is known for being, a pretty tough college, but it was the right environment. It was the right fit for me. It was the right level of attention, and support. And it was just a wonderful academic environment. And I learned there the science of psychology. Like people, in fact, I just told this story recently that someone told me I was too smart to be a psychologist.
Who told you? When was that?
One of my mom's friends who probably hadn't, this is when I was in high school and I wanted to go to college to be a psychologist. She's like,
you knew that back then.
Oh yeah. I picked, one of the reasons I picked Franklin and Marshall is because I wanted to double major in Spanish and psychology. And there weren't listen, this was 25 years ago, but there weren't a lot of colleges that had both those majors. Particularly Spanish was often a minor, but I was very clear I wanted to major in it, which I did at Franklin and Marshall. I studied abroad in Spain and still speak Spanish pretty fluently. But I knew I wanted to be a psychologist who spoke Spanish because I wanted people who are native Spanish speaking countries to be able to do treatment in their native language. So I was able to do that. So I knew that in high school. But I didn't know the kind of psychologist I wanted to be until I went to Franklin and Marshall. And, every class there, it's a really unique curriculum. Every class has a lab, including intro.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Oh, so they really emphasize the science side of psychology there. Yeah.
And I loved it.
So I didn't realize that you were aiming in that direction from high school onward.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why. That one I don't know. Maybe it was sort of my experiences but intuitively I I wanted to be, well, actually, you know what? That's kind of not true. Here's another little like backdoor secret or not, just I wanted to be a sex therapist at some point.
Oh.
And so but I decided later that, sex therapy was really kind of more niche than I wanted to go, but I still do a lot of couples work. And we often talk about, sex and sex lives and how that impacts a relationship. I'm not a sex therapist, so I'm not trained at that level, but I'm guessing if I had to go back, that was likely why I wanted to major in psychology. And you know why? That was, there was a really amazing health teacher who was getting his PhD in sex therapy. And you know how people just influence you, right? Not in a come alongside it was more of just, he was just a really cool guy who he called it the rap club, and he would run this club where we could just hang out and rap, right? Talk.
Yeah, right. Because back then rapping was talking.
And it was amazing. And he was so amazing. I should probably look him up and find him. His name's Dr. Gary Schoen. And he just was amazing. And so I think he just sort of modeled for me partially what I wanted to be, right? So someone who was supportive and collaborative and respectful, and created the spaces for people to be able to explore themselves.
Yeah, it sounds like even though your adolescence was disrupted in certain respects, with your situation at home and your mom's illness, it sounds like there was this part of you during that time that also had the opportunity to connect with a part of yourself that really had some keen and deep interests and goals and a sense of having a future to look outward towards.
Well, I think a piece of that, and this is, I know the data behind this, right? And so if I apply it to myself, like peers are really important, right? So who's around you? And I'm still friends. So now this is going back even farther back, right? But I'm still friends with the people that I met in fourth, fifth, sixth grade. And we're all successful, competent professionals and moms. We still all hang out. Believe it or not, all of us are still in New Jersey. I live about a mile from where I grew up, which is bonkers. And they're all within 20, 30 minutes of here. And we get together a couple times a year. We know each other's family very intimately. I think they sort of kept me grounded in the drive to succeed. And so that was really important. And I also, credit them for really keeping me on the path. It's not like they did it intentionally. It's just they modeled it. And so I saw what was around me and just kind of kept, it was like, I was like a lemming. I just kept moving toward success. Right. And luckily I had some decent skills on board to be able to do that.
Yeah. And so you had the opportunity to spend some time in Spain during your undergraduate years. It's funny, I was a psych major as well, and I wanted desperately to study abroad, but I could never find a good opportunity to study abroad as a psych major. I probably should have combined it with a language. That would have done it. I ended up in a little town in Minnesota for a semester. That's about as far in as I got.
That's abroad.
But I'm curious. So I know that you have your doctorate, and did you go right from undergrad into grad school, or did you take a little time in between to do some other things? Tell us where you went on from Franklin and Marshall.
So interestingly, this is another place where, failure is a part of the process, right? And I applied to graduate school my senior year. I had, again, outstanding GPA, outstanding GREs, and decent research experience given what Franklin and Marshall was offering. But, I don't know if you've heard, but PhDs in clinical psychology are incredibly difficult to get. In fact, I was told by someone in undergrad that it was so hard to get, I probably shouldn't try. Not my mentor, someone else who I often think about that moment and think about what it took for me to just internalize that, but then also just externalize and be like, you know what? Like, I'm going to show you. And I did. But I didn't get in my senior year. So my senior year, I spent my time working on my honors project. applying to graduate schools, applying for a Fulbright, applying for a British Marshall, all this stuff, and applying for jobs because everything I was going after was really competitive, and I knew that. And I was smart. I had backup plan after backup plan after backup plan, and I landed a really amazing job. So all of that stuff failed. I didn't get into graduate school. I got waitlisted a couple places. I made it through a couple rounds of Fulbright, but didn't actually get it, and like forget about the British Marshall. But I got a job.
The British Marshall, what's that?
It's kind of like a Rhodes Scholar for non-athletic people.
Oh, interesting.
I figured out at some point I was like, oh, I want to be a Rhodes Scholar because I always wanted to go to Oxford. I had this fascination with Oxford. And I was like, I want to go be a Rhodes Scholar. Turns out you have to be, I don't know if you know this or your listeners know this, but you have to be a really outstanding athlete on top of like a rock star academic. It's both.
Wow. I know. I didn't know that.
Well, I am not an athlete. People cannot see me, but I am not athletic. I never have been, at least not at that level. I enjoy adult softball, but that's, fun. I just kept all of the possibilities on the table, and I wound up at University of Pennsylvania as a project manager running a research trial which is pretty typical. Actually, now it is pretty typical. If you talk to a lot of PhD students, they'll tell you where they did their post-bac or where they post-bac. And when I was doing it, I was more just, actually, I have to credit, and I wish I knew who this was, but one of the programs I did not get into was Boston University. And I had been given the great advice to call their program, talk to the director of training, and ask for feedback on my application.
Interesting.
Right. So I failed. I didn't get in, but I was like, hey, do you mind just taking a moment and looking at my dossier and seeing where I can improve and strengthen so that this is really important to me. I want to do this in the future. How do I improve and strengthen? And he was lovely. It was probably maybe 15 minutes on the phone. He said, listen, you have all of the stuff that I already told you. Great. He was like, but you need a little bit more robust research experience to get into a PhD. So if you can find an opportunity like that, that would be seal the deal. And he was right.
Interesting.
Yep. So I wish I knew who that was. I probably can go back and figure out because, that was a pivotal conversation, and I appreciated the time and the feedback, and he was right. I worked for 2 years at University of Pennsylvania, had really amazing training and experience and opportunity. I worked really hard. I learned. That's actually where I first discovered motivational interviewing, which is what my book is on, and have been a trainer for 15 plus years. But started there, just learning about it. And then when I applied to graduate school, again, second time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I had worked on research, and I really found my passion. And initially, so here's I get called to interview at University of Pennsylvania, which, Penn is Ivy League. I'm like this first generation college student who just, barely made her way into college. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I found out it was at the Treatment Research Center. And then I find out the Treatment Research Center is actually an addictions treatment research center. And I am not embarrassed to admit that I had a lot of biases at that time about, I don't know if I want to work with like people who have addictions. Like that's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I got an interview for the job, and the role that they wanted me for was to lead a research program that was focused on comorbid depression and alcohol use disorders. So people who are both depressed and drinking alcohol. And I was like, depression. That's like clinical psychology 101. This is perfect. I can handle, and I'll figure out the alcohol thing. Well, as it turns out, I like fell in love with substance use disorder treatment research. And that's what I devoted my career to. And that really launched me into a lot of the behavior science work I do. So lots of different interesting stuff. And I wound up going to graduate school on a training grant from the National Institutes of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it all kind of like, I really believe that, the universe conspires, and I'm a big fan of The Alchemist, if anyone hasn't read that.
Yeah.
It's my favorite book. But just listening to the signs, right? And listening to what you love, which really, listen, we can talk about it as sort of the universe conspiring, or it's really just, paying attention to the data in front of you. And I became really passionate about this area and wanted my PhD from a good program and a great mentor, and to do really good work in the area, and including, what I'm super passionate about is including family members, partners, parents into treatment because they're impacted by someone who has a substance use disorder. And so I found one of the few, this is really funny, one of the few programs that had a really strong research base was at Rutgers, New Jersey, 15 minutes from where I grew up. And I had refused to go there undergrad. So, and now I'm a big fan.
Oh yeah. I always knew that was a great school for that.
Yeah, it's such a great, I had really great mentors. I wound up I had two female mentors, Doctors Barbara McCready and Beth Epstein, who were just amazing. And Barbara is a real, a real senior leader in the field. And Beth is really amazing and has her own really amazing success. And the two of them together just really shaped me into a really amazing researcher and professional. Like they taught me a lot about being a human and navigating in the world and how to survive in lots of ways.
I wanted to go back for just a moment when you first, it's interesting to hear you talk about your journey so far, because it, to some extent mirrors some of the things that I had been planning to do when I was at that point in my life, which was a few years earlier than you did it. But it's funny. I would have assumed that coming out of undergrad, that to try to get a research job would have been difficult, because I would have assumed that grad students, like master's students, would be doing those jobs, and that I would be, kind of an outsider competing with them. And so I think it's great that you got that advice and that you were able to go for it in that way, because I would have been totally wrong if you had come to me for advice at that point.
Yeah, who knew? And I'm not sure I knew that those jobs were there either, but there are lots of them at large research institutions like Penn and Harvard and even Rutgers. So if there's big research grants, they often have postbacks, really junior full-time roles. Yeah. And it's a great place to get your experience and get some publications or collect some data and really just learn about, real research at that level.
It's great.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm guessing that may also apply more so to certain sciences. People don't always think of psychology as a science, but there's a lot of science in there. And so I wonder if that might be true for that path, but there may be other disciplines where it might not be quite as true. But no matter, I'm just saying that for the benefit of the audience.
Oh, sure.
To ask those questions. But so 2 years at Penn, and then you reapplied.
Yep.
Did you reapply to some of the same programs, or I guess your focus had shifted, so you really went in some other directions, and so you reapplied or applied, because you weren't necessarily applying to the same places, and then you ended up going to Rutgers.
Yeah, I was much more competitive at that point, meaning that the 2 years under my belt, the connections I had made at Penn. And so I got interviews everywhere, but Rutgers was where I really wanted to go. And luckily, Barbara McCready really wanted me to work with her as well. And so I went up there for my graduate work. And then, so I'm a clinical psychologist. And so we generally, you have to do, the way it is it's, it varies 4, 5, 6 years at your home university, plus a year of internship, which is essentially like a residency for physicians. Right. And so I did my internship and postdoctoral fellowship out in San Diego at the at UCSD in the San Diego VA in La Jolla. And then I did my postdoc at UCSD and San Diego State. There's a lot of consortiums going on out there. So I feel like I've spent a lot of time, a few years in San Diego, really getting more of my research just consolidated and some really great research training with, again, more really amazing mentors
Wow.
out there as well.
So, yeah, so you really were immersed in the research space quite a bit, it sounds like.
The clinical, so yes, and I mean, I'm kind of not unique, but I'm a treatment researcher, so
Right.
a lot of my science is around interventions,
Mm-hmm.
which, so even when I'm researching, I'm often researching clinical and for, supervising, overseeing, doing a lot of the work that's treatment research. And so it has kind of both aspects, which I think that's a lot of how I shaped and grew, is having that interaction. I often identify as, I'll say I'm a clinical scientist, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
a scientist
Mm-hmm.
who's really clinically trained at a high
Yeah.
level.
Right. So, in other words, you're treating people at the same time, collecting different types of data and learning. I mean, patients know that you're doing this, but there's
Right.
different things that you'll do to get real life data from people who are going through various things and forming studies based on the different patients that you were working with.
Yeah, at that time, I don't do a ton of that kind of work anymore.
Yeah.
But that's really how treatment research works. As people enroll, they often get randomized, and maybe they get randomized to like a control treatment versus an active treatment. And then we're collecting data all the way
Mm-hmm.
along the way, and so then and I'm driving a lot of those interventions. Even now, I do a lot of that more in the health tech space of the implementation of behavior science inside apps or interventions in a different way. And then, but data are still being collected, but it's kind of like little r versus big R, right? So I think of big R as like the research, the randomized control trials, akin to how we find out if a medication works. It's sort of the same of how we find out if a psychosocial
Sure.
treatment works. And sometimes it's a combination of the two.
Right.
But we often do kind of a littler version in other implementations to see what's working, what are people using, how do we engage folks in treatment or in interventions. How do we make it stick, like other games that people play?
Mm-hmm.
How did Wordle get to be so exciting, right?
Right.
And that's, a lot of times there's some of it's just gamification or behavior science. So it's a little bit of a different application of what I do now as opposed to what I did back when I was kind of more sitting in the ivory tower doing research, if you will.
So once you finished your doctorate and all your postdoc work, what was the next step? It's funny because not really funny, but interesting that a lot of the times my guests on this podcast really made some what on the surface look like significant career pivots, even from one industry to the next. And from your perspective, you made some significant shifts in terms of, like, oh, people with addictions, really? I don't know about that. And then now, that was something that you really immersed yourself in. And I know you've made some other shifts, since that time. So in your own way, you've made a number of decisions along the way, strategic decisions about what direction you've been going in terms of your practice and your work. So I just want to clarify that because I could see where some people might see this and say, well, she's been a psychologist the whole time. How's that a career transition? It's like, well, not everybody makes the switches and the changes and does all the things that you've done. The book that you've written is another piece. We're going to get there in a moment. But I want to make sure that we're clear that there's a lot of intention around different moves that you've made, even though you weren't totally in control all the time of where you went, because like you said, after you graduated undergrad, you didn't get in anywhere. So you went through a number of different options and really explored the possibilities to see where you would land. So I think that in and of itself is a really interesting part of your story. So back to, sort of post grad doctorate and doctoral work. When did you land back on the East Coast?
Yeah, well, and we can, so this is actually where I think, ironically, this is where I think stuff starts to get interesting. So the next big, I started to want to move back east. I was in a relationship at the time. He was having a hard time getting out. So it's like, the age old story. We had been, and we had been long distance for the entire time I was in San Diego. I call back to my Penn contacts because I had really great experiences there. I said, hey, I'm looking to potentially postdoc. And I wound up speaking with a very senior faculty member who said, you know what, actually, I'm hiring for a junior faculty member. And I said, whoa, I'm not really sure I'm ready for that. And he said, well, it's pretty hard to find good treatment researchers. So why don't we have you apply? And oh my gosh, again, first generation college student who went, is starting to weave her way and now is applying to be faculty at a school that she didn't get into. Because by the way, I did apply to Penn undergrad and didn't get in. No surprise because I was cutting school all the time. But I landed the job. But it turned out actually it wasn't really the job I wanted. And I went up there, meaning that that level of research, that pressure to write and to do grants, and it just wasn't a good fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But here I was with this really amazing job, and how are you going to give up this job? And I wound up actually, so that relationship ended about 6 months after I moved back. Again, the way the story always goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd bought my first home. It was 2007. The economy crashes, 2008. And we wound up getting all these grants. So I was kind of like path dependent. You ever feel like stuck? You're like, well, we're getting all these grants because of all of the stimulus funding. I mean, and I was in a really great place. But I just eventually figured out it wasn't a good fit for me. And I was able to have really open conversations. Again, having good mentors and folks around you really helps. And then I was like, all right, well, what do I do now? And at the time, the Department of Veterans Affairs was doing some really cool stuff with evidence-based treatment, disseminating it across the national VA system. And they were looking to start up a motivational enhancement therapy training program. And so I got tapped on the shoulder to take a national role to help start and lead one of those programs.
Mm-hmm.
So again, and now I went from like the ivory tower where I was writing journal articles that only, a handful of people are reading. And now I was really excited because I got to do what I was passionate about. I really love teaching and training, and I love making an impact on a broader level. I figured out at that point that was really important to me. And working nationally in the VA was huge for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. And so I stayed there and did that for 5 years. I had already consolidated and become a trainer of motivational interviewing and part of the motivational interviewing network of trainers. And so I was already part of that. And now it just broadened my experience and broadened my touch. And so it was such a great experience. And so it was kind of fun to work there. I worked nationally. I was remote back then, which we're talking now. My daughter was, we're talking like 11 or 12 years. So I was remote
Mm-hmm.
before it was cool.
Yeah.
I was remote before we used video. So,
Uh-huh.
oh my gosh, I had managers who I had amazing relationships with and never saw. Can you imagine? Like, it's just crazy to think about. Like,
I
never even
know.
saw on camera.
Isn't that funny?
And I loved working in the VA. I had a joint appointment when I was at Penn for the VA as well. So I had a national role in a center of excellence there. So it was a natural pivot. It was nice to do. And then it was, things are good until they're not, right? And so it works until it doesn't. I got kind of bored. My team had sort of shifted. And so I started looking around for other opportunities. And we were also looking to move. And I got invited back to Rutgers to give a talk on motivational interviewing, and had lunch with a lovely woman who said, "Hey, we're looking to hire a new director of training." And, sort of did the lean in over lunch and was like, "Do you happen to know anyone?" And I was like, "Wow, I might." And so long story short, I wound up back at Rutgers as a director of training, right? So it's sort of actually one of the lessons I learned from one of my most amazing mentors and friends, Dr. Tammy Wall. She sat me down. She said, "Never burn any bridges."
Right. Right.
And how many times I've thanked her or thought of her, because you just never know when your life is going to circle back and touch onto someone else who was in your past. And so that became my next point. And I spent time at Rutgers. It was, just about a little less than 2 years. And while I was there is when I started working in private practice, and then eventually built my center as a Saturday morning copy.
Okay. So
Yep.
while you were at Rutgers, you built your center.
Yep. And it was just, it was literally like, when I say built my center, it sounds bigger than it was. I literally just got an LLC, got a part-time office, and started seeing my own patients.
Yeah.
And then I got bored at Rutgers, or wanted to make a change. And if you're not from New Jersey, you're not from the East Coast, this probably won't be as ironic as it sounds. But Johnson & Johnson's headquarters are based in New Brunswick, New Jersey, literally next to Rutgers University. And so I was talking to a recruiter at J&J for a behavior science role that I'd found out about. Actually, here's how a bunch of little worlds come together. I was presenting some of my pen research when I was director of training at Rutgers, but I was presenting the pen research at a conference called the Society of Behavioral Medicine in San Diego, right? So look at all these little dots connecting.
Yeah.
And I was up there presenting some really cool work that we had done. And then when I was on a break, at a cork bulletin board, I saw a posting for behavior scientists at Johnson & Johnson. I went ahead and texted the person who was there. And it turns out the director of data science had been at my talk and thought I was awesome, and had been telling her about my work.
Wow.
And so I went up interviewing at Johnson & Johnson, getting a role there, which that was a huge pivot, because I was moving from public sector to private sector. I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? But I was like, but J&J, how would you not? This seems just such a cool, and it was such a cool opportunity. And I really learned so much. And I worked at a center of excellence for health and wellness solutions at Johnson & Johnson, which allowed me to touch the entire enterprise and all of the different sectors and different opco. It was so cool. I really loved my work there. But, and then I wound up working at a startup for a short amount of time and keeping my practice that entire time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
So how long were you at Johnson & Johnson for?
A couple of years.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a lot of different experiences, and all the while starting to build up a private practice. But it sounds like you had a vision for where that was going to go eventually. Or not?
No, the practice was literally just a hobby. So when at some point I realized I'm trained as this clinical psychologist. I love seeing patients, but I'm not really doing it in the way I was trained. And I would really like to do that. And I guess the vision was, and this is our early tagline that's still out there, is evidence-based treatments in a warm, friendly environment. I wanted to bring really outstanding treatment to my community and really create this, I'm really down to earth. I'm a first generation college student from New Jersey who talks with an accent and curses occasionally. And I have all of this really cool interventions on board, and I can help people be the best version of themselves. I train other clinicians to do it. I coach leaders. I'd like to do it myself. And so that was really where the practice started, but then it just grew. And then Saturday morning became Saturday morning and Thursday night. And then eventually I was really burning out at the startup and decided to just grow my practice and see where it went. But that was at the end of 2019. And then we all know what happened in 2020. So lots of interesting developments in the last few years.
Yeah. So tell us about your book, where that came into play during this period.
Sure. So I learned about motivational interviewing post-bac, right?
Yeah.
So motivational interviewing, I'm assuming most people don't know it, but essentially it's a way of having a conversation with someone to help move them in the direction of change that's important and meaningful to them. And it's really about helping them find their intrinsic or internal motivation to change as opposed to pushing them from outside, which, it's not carrot or stick. It's actually like, hey, what's inside of you that you have already? And let's help you move and grow. It's very empowering, very supportive of someone's autonomy. And it's just very consistent with who I am and what my values are. And so I leaned very heavily into the motivational interviewing. It kind of, I bumped into it, and then I just really invested in it over the years. Became a trainer, did this national role, and because I became so passionate about dissemination and implementation, there's not a lot of clinicians who are trained in motivational interviewing, and if they are, it's really hard for them to do. And so the idea of the book is it's a self-help version of motivational interviewing. And so it walks folks through their own change journey using the principles of motivational interviewing, drawing out from them their values, helping them choose a goal that's values based and has some legs to it, and then helping them start on their change journey and stay engaged on their change journey. And so the book, it feels to me like it's so consistent with my meaning and purpose, which I define as better access to better care. And so that I really always want to help people access, not just get care, but access the most appropriate care for what they need, the most science-based, which is, we could have in fact, you and I did have a discussion the first time we chatted about the healthcare system in our country. And so I really wanted to create a self-help resource for folks where they can leverage some of the tools that my patients get to leverage in sessions with me all the time.
Yeah, it sounds great. It sounds a lot like coaching, actually. A lot of that. I mean, motivational interviewing really does mirror coaching in many respects, as does CBT, which is the name of your business, and cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not saying that cognitive behavioral therapy and coaching are the same thing, because your background, your training is, far deeper and wider than my coaching certification, for sure. But there are some parallels. But I think that the places that you would go with patients is very different than the places I might go with clients. And the nature of the work itself, just takes people in different directions, different places. So I'm not comparing them.
Oh, listen, go ahead and compare, because I think there's a lot of synergies and there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of coaches who are trained in motivational interviewing. And so I actually think my book and other books by some of my colleagues in the motivational interviewing arena would be really helpful, because listen, we all know change is hard. And if we say to someone, just do it and make the change, it could feel really invalidating. And even if we don't say it with that tone or that emphasis, but we imply it of, hey, I always talk about my favorite example, because I feel like a lot of people can relate, is flossing. And dentists and hygienists are often terrible at having conversations about change. They shame and scare you. I don't know about you, but that certainly doesn't work for me. I walk away from a lot of those conversations feeling terrible about myself and really dreading my next cleaning.
Yeah.
And coaches, psychologists, all of us, none of us want to have that impact on someone.
No, absolutely not. And I'm sure you don't. So tell me what your business looks like today. Here we are in 2023, getting close to the end of 2023. Curious to know what it looks like today and how people can learn more about what you're doing today.
Sure. So I would love folks to find me on LinkedIn and connect because I post and write a lot about mental health and well-being. But the business is so it's a cognitive behavioral therapy. We started here in Metuchen where I live, and there's two. Started with just another mom and I. Well, it started with just me, and she joined me at the end of 2020. When I realized I couldn't really do this by myself, I was just inundated. There was such a high need in the pandemic for mental health. And I had a great mentor who said, hey, you could figure out who comes on the bus and then start to shape your business that way. And all I did is I put a little note out about, hey, I was looking to grow, and a fellow mom and psychologist in town was looking to make a change, hopped on the bus with me. And now there are 5 of us that are full-time, 2 part-time. We bought a building last year in Highland Park, New Jersey, which is very close to Rutgers. So again, still back in that Central Jersey arena. We just opened up a satellite in Riverhead, New York, which is on Long Island. And we do lots of telehealth, and there are 4 of us who are authorized to practice across 40 plus states. So it's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
So we have a pretty big reach, lots of different areas of expertise, and we support folks across every background, diversity, LGBTQA plus. We have we do couples, individuals. We have a real cool crew, and everybody that I work with who's joined the team is down to earth and friendly and warm and smart. They all love what they do, and they're all great at it. And we're a nice little crew, and so we care a ton about the work we do. And so if anyone's interested, I'm always happy to chat with folks or help them connect if we're not the right fit. But you could just find us. cbtcenter.org is our website, where it links to info about all of us.
Yeah, and people can find you on LinkedIn, and we'll have links to your book and your website and all your social media in the show notes. So I want to wrap up with one final question. So you've navigated quite a variety of transitions, and people listening to this are considering their own what's next. I'm wondering what would be a key piece of advice you might give to someone who is looking towards their next move?
I think this is actually an easy question for me to answer. Is I would say really take a look at your values and what's important to you, and not just, let me talk about do a values assessment. There's one in my book. There's it's part of it's part of the free tools on the publisher's website. I'm happy to send anyone any info if they need it, but really look at what drives you and take a moment, take a step back. And if you're not sure about that, you can also just look at when are you excited in your day? When are you energized? And then really thinking about, well, how do I create and build a life or a next step, just a next step, right? Don't even worry about a life because that puts so much pressure on you. But a next step that is consistent with those things that excite you. And I think if you can do that, which takes some awareness, this is where it takes a moment and to invest in and take some awareness and just think about your values and then choose your goals.
Yeah.
And then get help and talk about it. I mean, listen, this life we lead is not an easy one. And so get help and support. And there are plenty of people out there who will help guide and mentor and support you throughout your journey.
I think one thing, thank you for that. And one thing that you wove throughout this interview so beautifully and so naturally is the idea that every place that you landed, you commented on, I had a mentor here, or I had someone who gave me some guidance. So clearly, as much as you seem to be very self-directed and you have goals, you also stayed very open and curious to what other people who had a lot of experience had to offer you. And you allowed that to also be part of your thinking process. So it sounds like you made really great use of those relationships, and I'm sure you're paying it forward in a lot of ways with other people, and you've been very generous in your time here today and in offering to be a resource to the audience. So I want to thank you for being here today. It's been really fun to learn about your journey and all that you're doing to help people become their best selves.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really lovely.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Michelle Drapkin. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her early life, her transitions, and her current work. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you're interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygulerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 238. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out: Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career That Fulfills You. It's available in print and ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. If you were inspired by this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And please do subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Remember, subscribing is always free. If you're enjoying the podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would write a brief and honest review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find. Go to my website, tammygulerloeb.com/podcast. Click the link near the Apple Podcasts button. Follow the instructions provided there. You can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee. Go to buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.